Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today, our webinar is focusing on data from the depths, a practical case study with the Marine Biological Association. I'd like to welcome our very special guest speaker, Dan Lear, who is Head of Data Information and Technology at the Marine Biological Association. Would you like to introduce yourself, Dan?
Yeah, thanks, Natasha. It's a bit of a mouthful of an organisation. Probably just use MBA from now on. But,
okay,
that's Marine Biological Association. I lead the data and information teams here. We've got a site down in Plymouth in the southwest of the UK, where we've been here since 1888 as a purpose-built marine laboratory. So a long history. I've been leading the IT team since 2001 down here. So we've got, like I say, a long history. It's a research organization dealing with the kind of fundamental questions about our oceans, the biodiversity within it, and looking about how we can share that knowledge.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Next, I'd like to introduce our speaker, our lovely CEO, Brett from 101 Data Solutions. If you could introduce yourself, Brett.
Yeah, sure. So I'm the CEO of 101 Data Solutions. My passion is data. 101 represents an organization that likes to work with other businesses around data, optimization, securing, backing up, and many other things. Yeah, that's what I do.
Perfect. Well, now we'll head straight into the webinar. Take it away, guys.
Thank you, Tash. Dan, then.
Yeah.
So let's talk about research data. It's an interesting thing I found out before we started, that MBA has a world record, or is running the longest continuous plankton record, a CPR survey. It started in 1931.
Yeah, over 90 years of records and data, and we've got the Guinness World Record for the longest amount of, or the longest distance towed by a marine survey. So all that data is collected and standardized and held and published here at the MBA and shared with not just the scientific community but with the world. And we got a Guinness World Record in recognition of that.
That is amazing. That's an amazing fact, which I didn't know. 90 years. So that said, does that present challenges? Let's talk about your data challenges. That's a lot of information. You're sharing with a lot of people as well, a lot of researchers, etc. And I assume a lot of this data has to be open as well to other organizations to learn from.
Well, exactly. The whole purpose of science is to kind of advance knowledge and share information, collaborate on hypotheses. And as a result, research data is really dynamic. It's changing constantly, but it's also incredibly unique. You can't go back to the same place at the same time and collect that record. So every single data point we collect, every single data point we generate from our research, it has unique value and again, needs to be kept. We've got books and material in our libraries that go back hundreds of years, but equally we've got data that goes back, digital data that goes back hundreds of years as well. And that data needs to be shared and needs to be made available. But it's a challenging thing to have to get a handle on.
So what are your primary challenges around data, as in from an IT perspective? Availability we've talked to, retention obviously seems like is a key, and making it resilient. So I assume people could come on. Talk to me more about what you see as challenges that you've experienced.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, volume is the biggest and most pressing challenge we're seeing at the moment. We've got new and emerging ways of collecting and generating data that we're having to handle. So from an accessibility point of view, obviously, we're moving in a world of global cooperation in science to tackle some of the kind of fundamental questions about our world's oceans. So we need to be able to share that data as transparently and as openly as possible. But there's also issues around data protection, because again, science is collaborative, but we have to make sure we only share data that has been quality assured, has been approved. So there's tiers of availability that we have to have on data. And as I mentioned, science is iterative. We reanalyze, we revisit data sets. And so you'd have problems around versioning, around ensuring clear provenance of data. So that speaks to making sure you have quality metadata associated with all your data sets. And research is, in the marine environment particularly, doesn't attract, hundreds of millions of funding the same way maybe medical research does. And so everyone's trying to do everything as cost effectively as possible. Researchers are very focused on their academic outputs, their research outputs. And so it falls to sort of the IT and data teams to make sure that their data is managed effectively and that the systems and tools are in place to allow them to do that.
With data itself, that makes sense. Thank you for that. What types of data are we talking? Pictures? What comes out of research and work that's carried out by MBA?
So again, my involvement in this for several decades now has kind of seen a real evolution in this as well. It used to be that we were only dealing with spreadsheets, Word documents, and and sort of simple office style text files. Certainly, like these advances in monitoring techniques, in sampling techniques, we're seeing imagery and have been for the last decade or two. High quality imagery. We're now getting 4K video, 8K video coming in, and the volumes of data that we're having to manage are sort of growing exponentially. We're seeing new ways of monitoring the ocean using DNA technology. So we're now storing genomic data, so the sequence information that sort of encodes every living cell. So again, these volumes of data are just are ballooning. So we need to have a better handle on how we manage it more than ever.
Would you say over the next 5-10 years you see research data because of the new methodologies, 4K, 8K, that's pretty much doubling? That an image will double because of the quality and resolution and the pixels, etc. Is that right? Was that the right assumption to make?
Yeah, and it's getting, in a way, it's getting easier to collect this data. It used to be if you wanted to take a picture, you had to send a guy down to dive and visit these sites. Because we've now got autonomous vehicles that can run sometimes for months at sea on their own. They can just keep collecting data and beam it back. So obviously there's challenges about data transport as well. And that, again, marrying that or comparing that to the requirement for open data, how do you share 8K video over an internet connection? It's challenging around not just the storage is the biggest one that sort of occupies me, but also that requirement to share the data.
Forgive me, how is that done at the moment? So you have a vessel that will go out, do these recordings, and someone will have to come and ship it back, or because you're not going to, like you said, you're not beaming 8K video from somewhere in the Antarctic as an example, are you really?
No, so you'll just have the kind of the JBOD, the just a bunch of disks type approach where people just store it on hard drives. The research cruise finishes and it gets shipped back. And then it's the challenge for the data managers to then take that data, download it, curate it, make sure it's quality assured, make sure it's standardized and available.
That's no mean feat, is it really? It's a lot of work.
It is, yeah, it is, and it's kind of, again, I would say this, but they're the sort of the unsung heroes of the research world, is the people doing the data crunching in the background, both the sort of research technicians within the research groups, but also the sort of IT and data teams.
You have my empathy with that, absolutely. Okay, let's move on. So I wanted to talk more about the current challenges. We talked about the challenges where data is growing. In terms of the infrastructure as it has been in MBA, what did that look like around the storage of different files, different research papers, different objects within the infrastructure?
Yeah, sure. So I can take you back to to when I started, 2001, we had 2 Windows NT servers that,
Nice.
that stored the entirety of our data. We now have 950 terabytes of storage within the organization, and that's with on-site and a DR site. So you can see how we've grown in 20 odd years.
That's a lot.
It's
Nearly a
yeah.
petabyte, aren't you? Wow.
Nearly a petabyte. Only, like I say, that there's some scope for growth in that. I think we've got 50% allocated at the moment, but because we're seeing this growth, and because, coming back to my point, the kind of dynamic nature of science, and the MBA specifically, we cover and research everything from the kind of submicroscopic level with sort of fungi and at the cellular level, all the way through to the sort of tracking of basking sharks and large mammals in the ocean. So we cover everything from microbes to megafauna, and each research group handles its data in slightly different ways because there's different standards and different parameters that they need to measure. And so we're seeing like a real sort of fragmentation in this data. And it also isn't the case that, you know, they'll complete a bit of research or a bit of work and that data set is done. It can be preserved, it can be archived. They may revisit it, they may iterate on it, they will add to it. Like say, we've got a 90-year plus time series that's continually evolving and continually being added to. So we've got this sort of fragmentation of really dynamic, really rapidly evolving data. There's hypotheses being tested. There's versions of data being created because someone will be following a specific research path. But we also have, a turnover of researchers within the organization. And because the nature of scientific information, you can't just delete this. I say it's unique. You can't recreate that data. And so we have a long-term commitment to maintain and manage and store that data. So it's year on year that kind of volume is increasing, but also the complexity is increasing. And I think, again, we didn't have a harmonized approach across the entirety of the IT estate simply because everyone worked differently. There wasn't a one-size-fits-all solution.
What is the plan going forward? So you've determined there's complexity. I didn't know about the iteration. So you could have a particular project, but many iterations of that particular project. So that's not exactly seen as a duplicate piece of data. That in fact is its own unique piece of data from an original source.
Yeah, exactly. And that's
Wow.
not to say we don't have duplicates because we know we do. The plan going forward, like I say, we've always maintained a large amount, as I mentioned earlier, of on-premise storage because of the ability to manage access and manage costs. With a single capital purchase, we knew what we got, we knew what the sort of the depreciation on that was. We could allocate storage. We weren't at risk of ingress and egress costs that were kind of bundled into cloud offerings that, again, because of that dynamic nature of science, the need to revisit data that you haven't touched in 5 years, the cloud solution didn't necessarily meet our requirements at the time. And so we, and also the fact that, because it had been evolved this storage approach and the way it had been managed in a disparate way between the research groups, we didn't necessarily have good oversight across the storage that we had. We knew that there was duplication in there, and we knew that there was sort of fragmentation of storage that could be optimized, but we really didn't have a solution for understanding what we've got. There's the sort of old management mantra: if you can't measure it, you can't manage it, which gets thrown around a lot. But in this case, I think it's really true. We didn't have sufficient handle to make sure that we could deploy our storage going forward in the most optimal way.
Can I ask you about what compliance legislation you've seen or seeing or coming to the NBA?
Yeah, so I mean, the obvious ones are around data protection and GDPR and making sure that we manage personal data in an appropriate way. Everyone's been kind of aware of that and had to make allowances for that. It's less impactful for us because NBA, as I probably should have said at the start, is a research charity, and so we're not a public body. We're not a government laboratory or anything like that, so we're not mandated in the same way as those organisations are. That said, we are, we've registered with the Information Commissioner's Office. We comply with the UK Data Protection Act, but there's things like the Environmental Information Regulations, where people can request environmental information, and also the various policies from our funders, because the way the research works in our organisation is through funding grants and funding bodies. So within the UK, you have UKRI and the Natural Environment Research Council, and associated with those grants are terms and conditions about how long you need to retain the data for, how available it needs to be, who can request access and when, and what the timescales for responding to those data requests are. So again, it ties into the government's open data sort of mandates and approaches, and the open government license that gets applied to data generated from government funding. So there's a lot of our efforts go into those open data governance frameworks.
Has the traditionally that wouldn't have been the case, and does you see that varying quite often? Before we know about GDPR, but I didn't know about that's part of the research funding that you get. Do you see that changing often as well, or is it pretty much the same thing? Where is it? Whose is it? How long is it? What's in it? That type of thing.
It's fairly standard across the landscape. There's
Right.
nuance depending on who the funder is.
Yeah.
But it's particularly complex when you get some of these long-term time series data sets that we mentioned right at the start, where you've got different funders over the life cycle of that data set. So you might have private philanthropic money that's funded something, and then it's morphed into being funded by a government pot of money, in which case that bit falls within an open license.
Wow.
So that understanding of tying data to the source of funding and the metadata around that data is really key to knowing what you can do with it. So there is again, in the data management world, there's another mantra, which is as open as possible, as closed as necessary. So sometimes it's closed because researchers need to publish papers and they put an embargo on the release of that data to give them opportunity to produce their research papers. Sometimes it's because it's commercial in confidence. So data is associated with a patent, for example, or with commercial developments like offshore wind farms. And then again, there's an embargo period. But if you don't know what data you've got and you don't know the terms and conditions associated with that funding that allowed for that data to be collected, the management of it gets incredibly complex.
That's really interesting. I didn't know that. Very interesting.
It's another bit that keeps me awake at night.
Oh, yeah, it sounds like it. That's very, very complex. Which sort of leads me on to my next conversation piece is, what's your view on AI and how this could potentially help? Because I'm a fan of it if managed correctly. And what we do know is clean data with AI is awesome. Metadata, using metadata correctly and editing metadata in research sets will provide a far more efficient way of extrapolating information from particular pieces of information or pieces of data. So just wanted to get your thought. Have you thought about it? Are you thinking about it? Do you see it as wow, that's going to be a great thing? Or
Yeah, I mean, again, I smiled wryly when you said what my opinion of AI is, because it gets thrown. It's ubiquitous at the moment. I mean, it is everywhere, but particularly in science, in research, is that it's being held at every webinar or seminar I go to is about AI approaches in
Yeah,
X.
sure.
And there's no doubt that it is a really incredibly powerful tool. So one of the areas where we've been working on this within the MBA is, he talked about these huge increase in volumes of imagery data that we're able to collect now. Now, historically, it would be someone sat looking through microscope slide after microscope slide, or image after image, manually drawing a circle around it, going, yes, that's a certain species, or that's a bit of plastic in the water. We've now got AI image classification, which will do a lot of the mundane work on it, but only if you've got good reference data, that clean data, well curated, well described, well managed data, is essential. Otherwise, you're in the garbage in, garbage out world. And so, yeah, it's everywhere, but I think it's still very nascent in its applicability, and particularly where we are looking at the use of our data for statutory purposes, for designation of marine protected areas or protecting species. I think there's still a long way to go, but core to it, absolutely, the ability to be able to work through large volumes of data, to classify, to categorize, is where it's really strong. But again, you need that training material, and the quality metadata to underpin that. Otherwise, it's not actually helping, and it should never remove the kind of the human in the loop side of it. Because we are dealing with critical environmental data, there is that need for that human level of validation and quality assurance.
So more of the labor intensive, and you can trust it to pick out the right piece of the image. It
Exactly.
works there.
Yeah. And I'm not saying we won't get there, but we're not there yet.
Yeah, of course. Let's move on to what we've assisted in. Okay, so Tash, next slide. Okay, so just going to cover this briefly. We proposed an audit, and we wanted to assist in discovering data for MBA to give those levels of insight and understanding of what's where.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, just to interrupt you, I guess, Brett, because one of the we've worked with 101 on projects in the past, but again, we spoke to you guys around this one to help us get a better handle and a better understanding on our data, and we looked at commercial sort of off the shelf solutions, and nothing quite fit for our requirements. Again, charity, small organization, 90 people on the payroll, IT team of 2.5 people. And that's why, again, we partner with 101, bringing that expertise. So I wanted to set a bit of context of the background to the work.
And I appreciate that. Thank you very much. I often miss context sometimes. So we effectively came in, set up some virtual machines, deployed different tools, which looked at, I think it was 10 plus drives. I think we looked at 10 drives.
Yeah.
Of varying size. I think the data set, could you remember the size of the data set we've initially looked at? 120 terabytes or something? What was it?
Something like that. It was like 8 million files, individual files it reviewed.
Yeah, it was a lot of files. It was a lot of files, wasn't it?
Yep.
A lot of files. And what did we discover? I'm not going to dig too deep. I'll let you take that. So we provided an output after the work was done, which discovers modification, file types, location, how big, last accessed, all of these things to provide decision makers like yourself duplicates, context of what can be done.
Exactly. And
what did you think
what you gave us was intelligence. Basically, it gave us that oversight that certainly manually would have taken, you know, weeks, and we don't internally have the resource to do that. So partnering with yourselves on this was the way we chose to do it. And you're right, it gave us insight into that data to allow us to make informed decisions, particularly around, you know, where there's levels of duplication, again, through that iterative dynamic nature of research. It's a unavoidable consequence of the way we work, but again, it gave us that insight. But also, again, we've got a roadmap for our storage to move to a hybrid cloud approach. What we don't want to be doing is migrating data that doesn't need to be migrated. And so by looking at things like, you know, last access dates, levels of duplication, owners of data as well, because we have a sort of again, a range of researchers working here, including some who have then left the organization, but because of the nature of environmental data, we're required to store and maintain that data. You know, do we need to keep that on premise? Can we migrate that to the cloud? These are the sort of questions we're asking ourselves at the moment as an organization, and the analysis and the outputs that you guys provided have given us that baseline to allow us to do that.
It's very interesting that the majority of organizations across research are not too dissimilar around duplicate data. Those are the quick wins, where what we've seen with other organizations, 20%, sometimes up to 40% duplicate. This is not different iterations of, this is someone saving something which is the same in 3 or 4 locations because they're unsure of a particular process. And that leads on to training of or consolidating into different ways of working. Moving something to SharePoint will manage it differently than on-prem. It's far easier to manage through libraries and then just giving people access to libraries. But it's, generally the rule is 20 to 30% duplicate data, and that's a quick win. We see that for savings on energy, CapEx savings as well. So we're not having to purchase more and more capacity to store the data, to retain the data. That's not required. And the power and cooling, which is important. So, sorry, go on.
Yeah, as I was going to say, and I think you kind of alluded to it, isn't just this context that we've been provided with now isn't just leverage for a technological solution, it's for a cultural one as well. It's about giving people better intelligence, you know, the individual researchers, because it's, again, everyone's working flat out, we're all very busy, and sometimes it's easier just to save multiple copies than it is to you know, to go, oh well, do I need to save that here, have I got versions, you know, it's that checking your work approach. And so having that, as I say, that background knowledge that this has given us, hopefully helps that training, helps that cultural shift. I always kind of, one of my usual soapboxes is that, you know, the technology is easy, it's the cultural change that is the most challenging part of any implementation. But this output and this work has given us some of the background knowledge to help promote and push that.
Okay, thanks, Tasha. I think we're on the last one. I just wanted to drill in a little bit more around the we talked about expected results. So we're talking about a fundamental change in how people use data within MBA and how they save data. Have you got any other views of what the future lies? What do you predict around these changes in file data, unstructured data management? You mentioned that hybrid is a way, and that's cloud storage for some and on-prem for others. Could you give me a couple of minutes on that?
Sorry, you did break up a little bit for me then, Brett. I don't know if it was me or you, but do you mind repeating it?
Yeah,
Sorry.
no, absolutely. The point I was coming on to is we've got the analysis. We know there's going to be a shift on how things are done and saved. What do you see with what you've learned from this particular piece of work, how that's going to carry the MBA forward in terms of changes, an example, more confidence around compliance, those types of things?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it is, like I say, we can't progress with the consolidation of our storage from what we've got in a kind of fragmented hardware approach at the moment. We can't consolidate unless we know what we're dealing with. Like I say, that intelligence that we've got is fundamental to that, and it will move us into a position of being able to share and publish data in a more, as you say, in a more confident way, because we will know exactly what we've got, where it is, who the responsible party is, what grant it was collected under, and we've got all that information, but we don't have it, as accessible as it could be. Particularly as we're moving into the world of, AI analysis, coming back to your earlier point of the relatively new concept of digital twins of the ocean. So people are recreating models, simulations of the ocean. And for that, you need machine actionable data. And for that data to be machine actionable, we're not talking about individual scientists downloading data. We're talking about connecting data via APIs, via programmatic interfaces. And in order to be able to kind of tie into those systems that are being developed at the European and the global scale, you need to know the full metadata, the provenance of that data set. And because one institute isn't going to, solve the problems that the world's oceans are facing, we need to be working in more open and more collaborative ways. We need to be sharing our data more seamlessly and with as low friction as possible. And all of this work I see as kind of fundamental to that bigger picture, not just from a compliance with funders' mandates, which we've already talked about. There are data management plans associated with every research grant that says what you will and won't do with the data. So it's checking in and making sure we're compliant with those, but also sort of enabling that bigger picture, of global collaboration to answer some sort of fundamental scientific questions.
I'd really like to learn more about that when that happens, Dan. Perhaps that's another conversation for another date. Just for my own curiosity, does that mean there's going to be a standardization on how data is managed, stored, and shared? Do you think?
Oh, well, I mean, there already is. So I'm involved in a number of projects, both sort of within the UN and also in the EU, looking at interoperability of data.
Oh, okay.
So there are global standards for biodiversity data. There are global standards for genomic data, for eDNA, environmental DNA data. And so again, there is another layer to the work on data standardization and data transformation, but that's sort of further down that data pipeline and that data value chain. But yeah, there is work already. There's a set of variables that are globally applicable. They're called the essential ocean variables, that allow us to share and compare data on a global scale.
That's amazing. That's really interesting. Really interesting. Thanks for sharing that.
No worries.
Tash, I think we're going to hand it back to you now.
Thank you so much. That was really, really interesting. Really interesting research and how you're managing your data. Now it's your chance. If you have any questions, you can write them and we can pop them up on the screen. If you do have any questions afterwards, then please just let us know and we can contact Dan and Brett and get any questions to them that they have. Doesn't appear that we're going to have any questions today. So I'd like to say thank you so much. If you do want to make any inquiries or anything about what we've spoken today, please either go to our website Oh, we have had a question. Here we go. It's quite a long one. So let me pop it on the screen. It might be too long. So thank you so much. So from your perspective, what should a small environmental charity prioritize when trying to develop more robust data management practices? Our IT support is outsourced and excellent for routine troubleshooting, but we lack specialist guidance needed for organization-wide improvements. All of our storage is cloud-based, yet different teams manage and structure their data in inconsistent ways. And we're looking for advice on how to move forward a more standardized, cohesive approach.
Okay, so yeah, great question. I'm sure I know Costanza as well, so I recognize the name certainly. Metadata, which is one of those things that as soon as you say it, normally 60% of the room glaze over with, but actually having a handle on your metadata, understanding what you've got, where it came from, who's responsible for it, is key, and that's the first layer of any sort of audit, and it's kind of what we did here is about the metadata, about the storage, but it applies also at the kind of data set level, both sort of discovery metadata and evaluation metadata. So I'll give a plug for if it's marine data, because again that's my speciality. Within the UK we've got something called the Marine Environmental Data and Information Network. It's an open partnership called medin.org.uk, and they promote and support data standards both for metadata and at the data level across all environmental domains. So they would be an organization that could support any queries you've got, but also just be more than happy to have that conversation offline as well if you want to reach out.
Brilliant.
Thanks, Dan.
She says hi, Dan. Brilliant. Oh, well, thank you ever so much for everybody attending today. Thank you so much to Dan and Brett. That was really interesting. And yes, if you have any questions, please let us know. Thank you ever so much.
Thanks a lot, everyone. Cheers.